Okay, let's talk about aquarium heaters. I'd like to apologize in advance if you hear my kids in the background. They're watching Rapunzel. Hopefully they'll be quiet for us, but we'll see how that goes. Kids. So, uh, heaters come in many brands, wattages, sizes, materials. They all essentially work the same way. Power comes in, goes through a thermostat, which is basically a light like a light switch. Turns it on or off. When you turn your light switch on, power goes through the heating element, heats up the water, keeps your fish happy. When it gets too warm, the light switch turns off, and off comes the power. No heat's being made. There are 99% of the heaters in the hobby are worked in this principle. They are not variable controlled. They are on and off. Simply put, you cannot set your thermostat, or you cannot have your heater at 78 and it's not always going to be on at 78. But we'll discuss that a little bit more. Some things to keep in mind: why some heaters are bigger than others. It's essentially because the heating element or coil is made from different materials. Some are a little more extravagant than others, but they all kind of do the same thing. So some of the easier ones are your non-adjustables. You can't adjust temperature. They're really inexpensive. They're great for people new to the hobby or people that just don't want to think about it. They just kind of want it to be there, do its thing. They don't really want to control it too much. Cons, if your fish ever get ick or anything like that and you need to crank the temperature up, well, you can't do it with this kind of heater. The heater on the back will say what the set temperature is of the heater. Or it might give you the heating range, which is your hysterias. We will go into a little bit onto hysterias later. And then it'll have a little light that turns on when you know it's on, and it'll give you the wattage rating. Quick note on wattage. Wattage is a measure of electricity, a measure of energy that can be released by that heater at a time. So wattage, it does have to, how can I say this? It does, the higher wattage will use more power, but it's not going to affect the efficiency, if that makes sense. So a 50 watt heater Aquarium and a 50 watt heater from Eheim, even though they both put out 50 watts, they both might not use the same amount of energy because of how efficient they are, if that makes sense. Some of the determining factors in that would be insulation inside the heater makeup, what the external coating on that is, as well as flow rates, etc. So a fully adjustable bimetallic strip, these are by far the most common. They usually have a knob or a dial on top that you can dial in the temperature you want. They are controlled by a bimetallic strip, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Your inline heaters typically going to be used by people with sumps or with canister filters. Some have knobs. They might also have a remote thermocouple that you can throw in your tank, 2 cents temperature. But you need to have them in line, and they do not go in your tank, if that makes sense. So there's your digitals. So these are going to be the fanciest, I guess. They are controlled by a thermocouple, and we will go into that a little bit more. Yeah. So how they work. So again, there are two kinds of heaters, and they're both controlled by one of these two, either a bimetallic strip or a thermocouple. So your bimetallic strip, this is your most common style of heater. They are reliable, inexpensive. You can control the temperature on them, and on some you cannot. Some of the cons are the hysterias is large, and most of the time they are not easily or not able to be quote unquote calibrated. So how they work is there's two pieces of metal that are either glued, soldered, or fused together. One side of your plug, we'll call it the neutral side, is attached to the bimetallic strip, and your hot wire, the other side of your plug, um, is attached to this side. So your heating element would be up here, and then it would close the circuit. So, and then your plug would be in line there as well. Excuse me. So, because the metals react differently to temperature and expand and contract at different rates, it'll allow this bimetallic strip to flex. When it flexes away from the contact, no electricity can flow to your heating element, and your heater's off. So as your temperature drops, this bimetallic strip is going to flex the other way, and this is going to come in contact, closing the electric circuit to heat up your water. This is why they are on-off. EHIMs with the red quote-unquote calibration knob, essentially what you're doing is you're moving this contact in and out. Because this flexes up and down, you can move this contact over this way, and it'll adjust. It'll turn on faster because this area is not going to flex as much as this side. So these heaters are rated in cycles. So as these flex back and forth, just like when you're opening up your pop can, if you flex it too many times, eventually the metal is going to break, and that's what happens when your heater fails off. When it fails on, and you hear people talking about cooking their fish, this contact is welding itself, because as it comes closer and closer and closer, you are going to get a spark to close the circuit. It's going to be what happens. So eventually, after so many sparks, the metal is going to become molten, and it's going to fuse these two together, fusing your heater on. And that's what happens when people cook their fish. Some other things can happen in there as well. You know, there could be other critical failure. Piece of metal could get jammed in there, debris or whatever you want. But that's typically what happens. So thermocouple style. Some pros: they have a temperature readout. Adjustable hysterias usually. They can be finicky because they do have a lot more electronics inside them. Especially with these E series, they do have a flow rate sensor on them. So if it doesn't read any flow, it'll flash LF and won't allow the heater to turn on by itself. There are some easy remedies for that, is to remove this outer shielding, which is one of the most common rectifications of this issue, or to move it to closer to your filter. But we'll get into that in filter or in heater placement. They are more expensive, obviously, because of the amount of electronics inside them. And some people, it is debated, but some people will say that there is more to fail. So every little part, eventually you're going to have a cog that fails, right? So they work on the principle of thermocouples. Basically, two wires are twisted together and then soldered. As heat is applied to the two dissimilar metals, electrons will flow to create their electrons will get excited and flow through the circuit. This flow rate of electrons in your wires can be measured by a multimeter and can be used to control a relay. So a microprocessor will read how many millivolts this circuit is creating, and it will, when you adjust the thermostat, you're telling your microprocessor that at X amount of millivolts, I want this heater to turn on, or I want this heater to turn off. So you'll say temperature, you'll say I want it to be at 78, but the programming will tell it at X amount of millivolts to turn on this. And then that will then send a signal to a relay, which is like a light switch, to turn your heater on or off. There is no consumer grade thermocouple heater for aquariums that is variable control. In my experience, it does not happen. They are all on off. Just keep that in mind. So your heater here, even though you say 78, it's not going to have your heater at 78. It's going to be on and off. So hysterias. So I'm going to use the people's houses because that's just a lot easier for people to understand. So when you set your thermostat in your house to 20 degrees or 21 or whatever you want your room temperature to be, your house does not stay at 20 degrees. Doesn't matter if you have a 20 or $250 Nest or you got a 1995 old bimetallic strip thermostat. It does not stay at 20 degrees. That is not energy efficient. So what happens is, as temperature rises, this is when your heater is on. So your temperature rises, it's going to reach the point in a hysterias where the high point is going to tell, okay, now we're getting a little hot, let's turn off. So it's going to break that electric connection, and that's going to allow, when your heater is off, that's going to allow the water to settle down. Now it's not at 20 degrees, it's not going to come back on. This might be 19, this might be 18 degrees. So at 18 degrees, it's going to go, okay, now we're getting a little cold, let's turn on. So this cycle from the heater turning off to back on, so 2 switches, is called a cycle. Your heaters and your furnace and your thermostats are all rated in cycles. How many cycles it can complete is the life cycle of your heater. So why this is important to us is, if we put a huge heater in our little tank, well, these cycles are going to be really, really close together, because that thing is going to kick on. It's kicking 300 watts of heat out, right? And then it's going to turn off really quick, right? And then it's going to be off for a little bit, and then it's going to be on off really quick, and then it's going to be on off. So we want our heaters to work a little bit more. So we want to create these cycles to be not as long as possible, but we want the on cycle to be as long, or the on portion to be just as long as the off portion, right? So we want to make these nice and long, right? That'll keep us in this golden zone here a lot longer than if these are really close together. So, excuse me. When sizing your heater, it's always better to be slightly smaller than slightly larger. Because when your heater fails, it's going to fail at these switching points. It's not going to fail when it's on. It's already on. It's not going to fail when it's off. It's already off. It's going to fail when it's switching from one to the other. So aquarium controllers, if you are in the hobby and you, I don't want to say you value your fish, but if you have the extra money, I would suggest buying one. They are relatively cheap. These Inkbird Wi-Fi controllers are $79. You know, you spend thousands and thousands of dollars on other things. What's $79 to protect them? One thing to note is they are not compatible with microprocessor style heaters. To be, if you're using it as your controller, as a controller, not as a protectant. So what you do is, there's a temperature probe which you throw into your tank. It'll give you a digital readout of your temperature, and then as long as the temperature is within or below that temperature, it will have a red light here that says heating, and it'll allow power to flow through to your heater. I use it to control, because I bought the Wi-Fi one, and I can control from my phone. I can adjust my temperature of my tank via that, and it gives me nice digital readouts if you ever really need to know that. And the hysterias on this is adjustable. I keep mine at plus or minus 2 degrees Fahrenheit, which means my tank's temperature is set at 78. So the temperature is allowed to fluctuate between 76 and 80. It works pretty good. My fish are happy. My plants are happy. So I'm not going to argue. Yeah. So let's talk about location of heaters. So if you read your manual from your heaters, instead of just throwing away the box like most people do, inside the manual it suggests that you put your heaters on an angle or horizontal. I swear by this because it gives you the most accurate reading of your temperature in your tank. When the water comes in, it gets heated, it rises, it carries on and does its happy little thing in your tank. Allows it to make nice big circles. If you have your heater vertical, your heat is going to rise up your heater right into your thermostat. So it is only going to control, or it is going to have a false, it's going to false cycle itself, because the temperature is going to, the water is going to rise right along the heater itself and heat up your thermostat. This way it'll just give you a more even heat and more accurate reading, if you will. Some things to be aware, like I said, with the E-Series, you have to be in an area of high flow, so I would not suggest getting an E-Series heater with a sponge filter, just because it's going to flash LF. E-Series heaters also, when it's flashing low flow, they will not turn on. One thing to keep in mind with them is when you first plug them in, they take about 35 to 40 minutes for the heater to set itself up and start pumping out heat. A lot of people don't know that. They plug it in, temperature's not rising, they're saying, I bought this piece of junk, throw it in the garbage or take it back. It's just doing its thing. You just have to make sure it's happy. Multiple heaters, again, I don't like how these are vertical. However, it was just a stock image I found. Multiple heaters, I would suggest putting them, this one I like over here, this one I would move over here more, or angle it over here so that the flow off this, that looks like a sick filter, or a C-chem, and I would allow it so that the water off the heat filter is pouring across my heater, allowing it to circulate a little bit better. I like having them far apart because this is going to create one hot zone over here, or one warm zone, and having it over here is going to create another warm zone over here, just to keep the water more even, or the water temperature more even. With this setup, it's going to be a lot hotter over here than it is over here, even if this is cycling the water from this side. Not a lot more, but noticeable. So I guess if you had it like this and you notice your fish are staying over here, maybe your heaters are a little too high. Or if the fish are staying over on this side, well, maybe you should probably turn up the heat a little bit on this side. So sizing. So everyone and their dog is going to have something to say about sizing. I'm not even going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So just some things to keep in mind when you're sizing or figuring what kind of heater you need. Just be aware of what kind of stock you have in your tank. You know, what do your fish need for temperature, and not where they are in the wild. A lot of people will go, my fish are from Lake Malawali. Temperature is between 76 and 82 degrees. Well, it's not really. It's between 72 and 94 degrees in the water. But were they bred there? No. Nine times out of 10, the fish you bought were not bred where you got them. We have to come out of the thought in the hobby of our fish are from X region. We have to go to more, my fish were bred, all the fish I have personally were bred in Edmonton. I am not trying to match the water parameters of the area where they were from. I'm trying to match where they were bred. But that's another story. Filtration. So every filter is going to give off heat. If you have large filtration, you might not need a large heater, because you might be getting a lot of heat off the canister filter. Eheim 2215s give off 25 watts of heat, and that's just from the canister filter itself. So do you need a 300 watt heater for your 100 watt tank? Maybe not. Lighting. Your lights are giving off a lot of heat, right? You know, if you got big fluorescence, that's pumping a lot of BTUs into there. Location. Do you have a drafty window? Do you have a lot of airflow around your tank? Is there a lot of insulation? Is temperature differential? Is your house at 24 degrees? Is your house at 18 degrees? Is it in the basement? Is it, upstairs where, is there a heating duct right beside it? These are all things you have to take into consideration. I would always suggest using more than one heater, My personal choice, I always use smaller heaters and more of them than large heaters and less of them. That's because I like to have that even flow around my tanks. So failures, like I said, so typically your failures, they're going to be your fish swam into it, especially with Oscars. They like to break heaters, knock them against the glass as cracks, allowing water to go inside. They short out. Um, when they short out, you'll hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, my fish got electrocuted." Typically not. Typically, what will happen is um, water will get inside. You'll notice your lights start blinking really weird when your heaters are turning on and your fish tanking. What the heck? Well, there's probably water in your heater, or it'll short itself out and then it'll trip a breaker. So just keep in mind, just look at them once in a while. If you see any moisture inside there, maybe it's time to think about replacing your heater. Electronic failure. I don't know what happened to this guy's controller, but looks like he maybe got wet, hot water inside, had a little electrical short, and then lit on fire. And one thing to keep in mind, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us do, but when you're doing your water changes, make sure you unplug your heater or drop it down to the bottom so it's always submerged, right? Pulling that heater out of the water, it's not the problem when you pull it out of the water, but once you leave it outside and it gets warm and you go to put it back in the water, pop goes the weasel. One thing to note about heaters, there was some old fluvels around. They were the plastic coated. I can't remember what they called them. Titaniums, I think they called them. They were plastic coated. They were recalled a lot of years ago. I have come across them in the past couple years as well. So if you see any of those heaters, make sure we get them out of there because they exploded in tanks and they released acid inside, and it's not very good. So in summary, you have to really have your wits about you with your heaters, figure out what's going to work for you. If you have any comments, let me know. I hope I cleared up some of the misconceptions about heaters, especially with the controls and how they work. Yeah, I'm always here if you need a hand.